So, the second thing that we want to talk about based on nutrition is that our genes are not our destiny. So, lifestyle can have a big impact on what our genes are doing and how our genes get expressed. So, there was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine from 2016 that evaluated 55,000 plus participants that were assessed for their genetic risks of cardiovascular disease and their lifestyle risks of cardiovascular disease. And the finding from this study was that among those with high genetic risk, if they had a favorable lifestyle, which included good nutrition, this was associated with a 46% fewer heart events. So things like heart attacks and cardiovascular disease. So even with the high genetic risk, your lifestyle choices can make a big impact. So what type of lifestyle choices am I talking about? So I want to talk just a little bit about the Mediterranean diet because there have been so many studies using this diet as a model system. So the Mediterranean diet is actually quite broad. It refers to a way of eating based on traditional cuisines of the countries that are bordering on the Mediterranean Sea. There's a lot of different countries that border on the Mediterranean Sea, so you won't see a single definition for the Mediterranean diet, but they typically all are high in vegetables and fruits, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. They use olive oil as their primary oil, and they have a lot of seasonings with herbs and spices. So within these diets, each day the people that are consuming them will eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and plant-based fats like those coming from olive oil. And each week they will have some fish, some poultry, and then other types of protein sources such as beans or legumes and eggs. So you'll notice red meat is not a big constituent of their diet. They do enjoy moderate portions of dairy products, especially things like kefir and yogurts, and they limit how much red meat is consumed. They also limit how many foods with added sugars are being eaten as well. So typically, if they're eating sweet things, they're naturally sweetened with their normal sugars that they would contain in a natural state. So what exactly are whole grains? Right? So whole grains have the entire grain kernel, which includes the bran and the germ and the endosperm. So some whole grain examples are whole wheat flour, bulgur or cracked wheat, oatmeal, and brown rice. Right? The refined grains have been milled, and this is a process that's going to remove the bran and the germ from this. This is done to help give a finer texture and improve the shelf life of the flour or other products like white rice that is coming from the milling process. But this processing also removes dietary fiber, iron, and many of the B vitamins that are held within these sources. So some examples of these refined grain products are white flour, corn grits, white bread, and white rice. Right? So if you're going to have the staple of a grain within your diet, try to make it a whole grain. So there's a randomized control trial that looked at the Mediterranean diet and its ability to prevent cardiovascular disease. And so what they saw, they followed this cohort of people out for about 5 years, and they were divided into 3 different groups. They had the control or standard diet, and then they put them on the Mediterranean diet. And 2 differences between these diets. One diet was high in nuts, and one diet was high in extra virgin olive oil. So that's our EVU here. And so you see a picture of the olive oil. And both of these diets had overlapping curves here you see that were much lower than the control diet in having any of these primary endpoints that they were looking at. So myocardial infarction is the MI, so this is a heart attack, a stroke, or any other death occurrence due to cardiovascular disease, right? And so the risk dropped by 30% for both of these groups that were on the Mediterranean diet that was high in nuts, or on the Mediterranean diet high in the extra virgin olive oil. So that's a pretty phenomenal drop, right? So again, your food choices make a huge difference in your health outcomes. And you can see this change in the curve here, right? It happened really, really quickly. So here is 1 year. So in as little as 3 months, just changing from this diet, their average diet, down to the Mediterranean diet can make a huge difference. So if you are eating a poor diet, it's never too late to start changing and to start bringing in better habits. It's not too late. You can still have big impact and big effects on your health. So some of these benefits of the Mediterranean diet, in addition to the reduction in cardiovascular deaths, there's significant improvement in blood pressure, cholesterol, plaque development, and insulin sensitivity. So all of these things that can contribute to cardiovascular disease. There's also reported decreases in migraines by about 40%, decreased inflammatory markers. We saw that the inflammatory markers contribute to a lot of different disease states. And there's a decrease in arthritis, both rheumatoid and osteoarthritis, for people that have this diet. And in fact, animal studies have shown that extra virgin olive oil prevents the development of osteoarthritis in animal models. So pretty striking. So again, our key takeaway is that our diet, the nourishment that we're putting into our body, can have a really large effect on our health. So what exactly are the health recommendations in the United States? Currently, we're using what's called My Plate. And so the healthy plate is a plate of food that has half vegetables, a quarter grain or starch, and a quarter of a healthy protein choice. So I am going to jump over to a worksheet that you guys will be doing for this week's homework. So the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, puts out our food guidelines, and you can see just a brief historical review of these guidelines. They started in 1916, and this was with some recommendations for food that you should feed young children and how to select food. So it was in its infancy at that time. This was upheld through the 1930s, and then in the 1940s, there was a revision to build a guide for good eating, and this had the basic 7 listed at that time. So this was a foundation of diet and nutrient adequacy. So it included a daily number of servings needed from each of 7 food groups, but it lacked specific serving sizes, and it was considered too complicated. There were too many food groups. So in 1956, we shifted to Food for Fitness, a daily food guide, which has our basic 4 food groups. This lasted up into the 1970s and is the 4 major food groups that we still see today. However, in 1979, they added a 5th group. So they wanted to limit the fats and sweets and alcohol, and so they put these into a 5th group so that those could be limited. In 1984, we changed to the food wheel pattern, and then in 1992, this shifted to the food pyramid. This is the one that I remember the most. And the food pyramid had goals for both nutrient adequacy and for moderation of consumption of each of the food groups. So the pyramid was kind of a nice system because you could see what your base should be and then adding in those layers of the pyramid in less and less until so the sweets and the high fat containing items were up at the top of the pyramid in the smallest amount. And the food pyramid was then updated in 2005 to be called My Pyramid and gave additional guidance to develop this system so that people could develop good food patterns and diets. And in addition to the food pyramid, which kind of is shown a little bit strangely here because like it's not layered like that first one is, but it also includes exercise, which you see the little guy running up the stairs over here. So this is a concept of variety, moderation, and proportions. And then in 2011, we shifted to the My Plate concept, and that's what we're currently using. And this tries to give an outline of how much space on your plate that these different components should take up. So fruits and vegetables making up half of your food consumption, and then whole grains and a lean protein should each make up a quarter. And then your beverage, dairy, 1 to 2 servings per day. And in your activity for today, you're going to actually be developing one meal based on this My Plate kind of topic. So in your activity for today, you'll need to go in and download the handout. And when you get to being able to fill out, you're going to create just one single meal based on My Plate. And then try to eat that meal. Don't just like fill one out, but say, hey, on Wednesday night, I'm going to make sure I do My Plate. And you'll start small with this small goal. All right. So back to our discussion. I just want to point out a few things about the food labels, right? Because they're on almost every product now, and they really can tell you a lot about what's in there. And so some things that you should keep on the lookout for when you're looking at food labels, if you haven't looked at food labels before, you should start. That's the first big thing. So there is always a listing up here about how many servings there are per container and the size of a single serving. So this one for this product, I don't know exactly what this product was, but 2/3 of a cup is a single serving. And then there's 8 servings in this container. So each serving contains 230 calories. So you'll get the calorie amount first. And then you'll get the concentration of fats, cholesterol, sodium, and the total carbohydrates and proteins in here. And so the fats are broken down into actually 3 categories. One of them's hidden in this total category. But then the other 2 are broken out, the saturated fats and the trans fats. So when you're looking at the fats, there's 2 things that you should think about when you're eating your food product, right? You want the fat to be less than 20% of the number of calories per serving. If it's over 20%, you should leave it alone, put it back on the shelf, right? You also want the trans fats to be 0. Never eat food with trans fats. Trans fats are products of processing in the production of the food. They're not natural fats that occur in nature. They're really hard for our bodies to digest. So they have kind of been outlawed for a long time now, and they should not be allowed in food products at your grocery store. So you should always see a listing of trans fat being 0. Okay, so you want to avoid these foods. You do want to try to have foods that are also low in saturated fats. So you can see here there's 8 grams of fat in each serving, and 1 gram of that fat is saturated fat. And so if we do the math there, that leaves 7 grams of fat still in there that are not saturated. And so the fats that are not saturated are called unsaturated fats. And the unsaturated fats tend to be a little bit more healthy for you. They can move around a little bit more and they don't stack as easily as the saturated fats. And so the saturated fats are the fats that tend to be solids at room temperature, but the unsaturated fats tend to be more oils at room temperature. So something like olive oil has a lot of unsaturated fats in it. But if you look at that coconut oil bottle, that's up on the shelf, you'll see in Safeway that the coconut oil is typically a solid at room temperature. That means it has a lot of saturated fat content inside there. Same with things like butter as well, right? That's going to be highly saturated fat. So you want to try to limit saturated fat intake and get more of those unsaturated fats. The cholesterol amount here is 0. You won't always be able to achieve that in your food. Things like eggs and meat products will have cholesterol in them if you're eating meat. Cholesterol is a product that is present in animal products. So it's not present in plant products. Plants have a different form of lipid steroids that have a little bit different base than the cholesterol molecule. So cholesterol is an animal product. You'll see that in any animal product that you eat or consume. Sodium, you want to have this limited to less than the number of calories per serving. So we see here 160 milligrams of sodium. That's below the 230 calories that we have per serving. So this is okay as far as sodium goes. But typically on sodium, the lower the better, because we tend to get a lot of extra sodium within our diets. It's in a lot of things. So you also want to check under your total carbohydrates, you want to check out the fiber that's present in there as well, and try to at least get in the 2 to 3 grams per serving range. This one's up at 4, so that's great. And then you'll notice down here too that there are added sugars to this substance here. There's added sugars that have been added to this product as well. You want to try to limit the addition of simple sugars like sucrose to whatever you're eating. And then, of course, there's protein. This is going to differ for different types of food sources. So depending upon what you're looking for that protein, this one is not really high in protein, but it does have a little bit. And then down at the very bottom, you'll also get some vitamin information as well. So here's an example of the healthy eating plate. So when you're putting together your activity this week, you want to think about each of the different categories that you're going to be looking at and how you want to fill in your plate. So for cooking, you want to try to use healthy oils like olive oil or canola oil. This includes use on salads as well. You want to try to limit butter and always, again, avoiding trans fat. Do not eat foods that have trans fat in them. One note, trans fats in the SAD diet are not completely avoidable. If you're eating deep fat fried food, the process of deep fat frying will create some trans fats. So if you are having those French fries, you're getting a little bit of those trans fats that get produced in that cooking process. So that's just an extra note there. So on your My Plate, the more veggies, the better. The greater the variety, the better. Potatoes and French fries do not count as your vegetable. So don't put them on this side of the plate, right? So this one has the whole grains over here. Whole grains and starches would be in here. The potatoes would kind of fall over to this side here, but it's not really as good as having a whole grain like brown rice, right? So there's a variety of whole grains like whole grain wheat bread, whole grain pasta, or brown rice. You want to limit things like white rice and white bread, things that have been more refined. And again, the color of your vegetables and fruits can be an indicator of the types of vitamins and minerals that they hold, and also of some of those chemopreventative compounds that they also make. And so you want to get a variety of colors in there as well. For your protein option, You want to choose lean meats or plant-based options. So things like fish, poultry, beans, and nuts. You want to limit the red meats and cheeses. Avoid bacon, cold cuts, and other processed meats. They are just not healthy for you.